When my baby was rushed to the ICU, I sent one plea. We need prayers. No replies. Instead, my brother shared beach photos. Family first. I said nothing. Weeks later, still sleeping in a plastic chair beside a beeping monitor, my phone buzzed with 81 missed calls and a text from Dad. Answer now, we need help. I called back. And then when I was pregnant, I had this recurring dream that I'd be holding my daughter in the hospital room, wrapped in a soft blanket, my parents beside me, maybe my brother cracking a dumb joke, and everyone just there. But life rarely plays out the way you imagine it. My daughter came, 8 weeks early. One moment I was picking out curtains for her nursery, and the next I was surrounded by voices shouting for blood, stats, and suction. I didn't even get to see her face before they took her. No cry, no announcement, just the sound of urgent footsteps down the hallway. I didn't cry, not at first. I think I was in too much shock to feel anything. They brought me to the NICU in a wheelchair, still in my hospital gown for tape to my arm. I remember the way the floor reflected the overhead lights, cold, clean, sterile. Then I saw her, my daughter, my little girl. Her skin looked translucent. Wires ran across her body like someone had put her together wrong. Machines beeped in a rhythm that made my heart race. I sat down in the hard plastic chair beside her tiny bed, hands still trembling. I didn't know what else to do but text. I opened the family group chat. My parents, my brother, my sister. I typed one line. We need prayers, please. She's in the ICU. It's serious. And then I waited 1 minute. Nothing. I assumed maybe they were busy. Maybe someone was driving. Maybe someone was asleep. But then, 15 minutes later, my brother posted a photo. Him on a beach, shirt off, sunglasses on, drink in hand. A big, dumb grin stretched across his face. Fion family first. Sun clinking beer mugs. I didn't say anything. I just turned off notifications. I looked over at my daughter again, her tiny chest moving under the respirator. I wanted to scream, but there was no time for that. My mom didn't call. My dad didn't text. My sister, who I helped get out of credit card debt last spring, didn't even leave a heart emoji. The next day, Evan showed up. My ex-husband, the man who left me a year ago and already had a new family, a new wife, a new baby boy. I hadn't expected anything from him. We were cordial, but distant. He came in quietly, carrying a coffee in one hand and a folded baby blanket in the other. He said nothing, just sat next to me, told me his wife knew where he was and that she'd packed the bag. That was the first time I cried. He stayed. He didn't make promises or speeches, he just stayed. My grandmother, who still worked the closing shift at the grocery store, started coming after work every other day. She took the bus. Sometimes she brought homemade soup and old yogurt containers. Sometimes she just sat and watched my daughter breathe. The rest of my family, silence. 2 weeks passed like that. Sleep came in half-hour bursts, curled in a chair with a thin hospital blanket draped over my lap. I memorized the rhythm of the NICU alarms. I knew every nurse by name. I started to understand the numbers on the monitors, which ones were good and which ones made my stomach twist. One night around 3:40 in the morning, my phone started buzzing. I ignored it at first. I was too tired, too numb. Then I glanced at the screen. 81 missed calls. One text from Dad. All it said was, "Answer now. We need help." I stared at it for almost a full minute, and I knew in my bones this wasn't about my daughter. I called back, and what my father said on the other end of that call, it wasn't a plea, it was a demand, and it broke something in me. The phone didn't even buzz. It was vibrating so hard it nearly slid off the tray next to my chair. I turned the ringer off days ago. When I finally picked it up, the screen looked like something out of a movie. 81 missed calls. One text, "Answer now, we need help." It was from my dad. I stared at the message for a long time before I called back. Part of me thought maybe something happened to my mom or my grandmother. Or maybe they finally understood what was happening. Maybe this was the moment they were going to rally when he answered. I didn't even get a full hello out before he launched into it. "Your brother lost his wallet. His cards are frozen. He's stranded and doesn't have access to his money. He needs help right now, Michelle." That was the emergency. He was stranded in Miami from the same beach trip where he posted that family first photo while my daughter was hooked up to a ventilator. I just listened, letting him talk, not interrupting, not responding. It felt like I was outside my body listening from across the room. Your brother's in real trouble. He missed some payment deadlines. There's interest racking up. He needs at least $12,200 or he's screwed. He didn't say how, just screwed. No details, no context, just the number. I waited for the question for him to ask me how the baby was, for anything, but it never came. So I asked him, "Did you see my message?" He paused, then said, "Yeah, but we figured you had it handled." I mean, prayers don't change machines, right? I don't know how I stayed calm. I really don't. I was sitting in a hospital room where I hadn't heard my daughter cry since the day she was born. I had watched her heart rate plummet on a screen, held her hand through thick plastic, signed emergency consent forms while doctors rushed her away. And the man on the phone, my own father, was telling me that his son's vacation mishap was more urgent than that. That's when I knew. That's when I knew. I'd been raised to believe that love meant giving until you were empty, that family meant loyalty, even when it wasn't mutual. But in that moment, I saw it clearly. I told him I couldn't help. I didn't offer a reason. I didn't justify it. I just said no. He got mad, of course, said I was being dramatic, that I'd always been the strong one, that I made good money, that I could handle both things. And then the part that really got me, he's just a baby Michelle. She won't even remember any of this. I hung up. I blocked his number, then my mother's, then my sister's, then my brother's. I stared at the empty group chat for a minute, then left that too. They didn't even ask how she was doing, not once. I sat in the dark NICU beside my daughter's incubator, watching the numbers on the monitor shift and stabilize, then rise again. I slipped my hand through the side and rested a finger against her palm, her whole hand barely wrapped around the tip. That night, I told her what no one ever told me when I was little. I told her that love isn't supposed to cost everything you have, that no one gets to use you just because they share your last name, that from now on, she was my reason. Everything I had left, energy, time, money, love, was going to her. Not to people who disappeared when things got hard, not to people who only remembered I existed when they needed something. The next morning, I sent one last message before deleting the chat entirely. Just 10 words. You weren't there when she almost died. Don't come now. It was quiet after that, really quiet. And for the first time in my life, the silence didn't scare me. After I sent that final message, I expected anger or guilt trips, or maybe even someone showing up at the hospital pretending they cared. But instead, there was nothing, just total silence. And it confirmed what I already knew. I'd stopped being useful, and that meant to them I no longer existed. For 2 more weeks, I stayed in the NICU. I lived in that stiff plastic chair, washing my face in the bathroom sink and changing clothes in the supply closet when I could. The nurses were kind. One of them started bringing me snacks from the vending machine without saying anything. Evan came every couple of days, checking in, bringing fresh clothes or food. He never asked questions. He didn't have to. My grandmother showed up every other evening. Even on days she looked like she could barely stay awake, she'd come sit beside me, knitting or flipping through magazines she brought from home. Meanwhile, not a single word from the rest of my family. Then, 2 days before my daughter's due date, the doctor told me we could start preparing for discharge. He was strong enough, gaining weight, breathing mostly on her own. The relief came in waves, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine something other than just surviving. I went home with her the next week. I walked into my apartment carrying a car seat that felt heavier than anything I'd ever lifted, not just from the weight of my daughter, but from everything we had made it through together. The first few days were chaos. Feedings every 3 hours, no sleep, bottles and formula, and late-night walks around the apartment. But I didn't care. I'd take chaos over the quiet hum of hospital machines any day. 3 days after we got home, my sister showed up at my door. No call, no text, just rang the bell like we were on good terms. I opened it holding my daughter, and she gave me this awkward smile, said she'd been meaning to check in. Then she said in the same breath that her rent was short this month, and she thought maybe I could help just this once until her next paycheck. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just said no. She didn't understand at first. She stood there like she thought I was joking. Then she asked if I was seriously going to let her struggle. I reminded her I had asked for one thing, just prayers, just a little support. She said she didn't think it was that serious, that I always made it through things, that I didn't need anything. That's what they all believed, that I'd survive no matter what. So why bother showing up? That afternoon, I went through my accounts and started making changes. I cut off the automatic transfers that were going to my brother's tuition, canceled the payment reminders I'd set up for my mom's credit card, deleted the shared family calendar that no one but me ever used. I didn't send an announcement, I didn't explain, I just shut the doors. They'd spent years assuming I'd never say no, that I'd always be there to bail them out, patch things up, pay the bills, play the responsible one. But something in me had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. And when you're finally done, it's like flipping a switch. You stop hoping they'll understand. You stop expecting apologies. You stop waiting for them to change. You just move on with your child, with the people who actually showed up. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying anyone but myself and my daughter. It had been a quiet stretch. Weeks passed. No calls, no texts. I figured they'd finally taken the hint. Maybe they'd moved on to their next emergency or found someone else to fix their lives. I focused on the baby. She was doing better. Still fragile, but stronger. Her cheeks had filled out. Her eyes tracked me now. She liked being held with her face against my chest right over my heart. That's where she always fell asleep. One Saturday morning, I was walking around the apartment in mismatched socks, trying to soothe her after a rough night, when someone buzzed the door. I glanced at the clock, not expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and froze. My mom, my dad, my brother, standing there like they were about to host a barbecue, not ambush the woman they ignored, while her baby was fighting for her life. They'd never once visited me in the hospital, never once asked if my daughter made it through the night. And now here they were, dressed neatly, smiling too wide, holding a brown paper bag like that made it normal. I didn't invite them in. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. My daughter was still asleep on my shoulder. My mom jumped right into it, said they'd been talking, said they missed me, said it was time to heal the family. He handed me the bag. I didn't look inside. I knew it'd be some homemade soup or pie or whatever comfort food they thought could smooth this over. Then my dad pulled out a manila envelope, said it was something he and my mom had worked on together, a spreadsheet. He actually used that word. It was a detailed log of all the money I'd sent them over the years. Dates, amounts, notes in the margin like emergency vet bill, college registration, mom's surgery COE. He said it was their way of showing that they never took me for granted, that they kept track because they always intended to repay me. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Then my brother stepped in, said he talked to a few friends, and thought if I was willing to restart his tuition payments, he could eventually pay me back. Maybe not right away, but in small amounts, like 10 or 20 bucks a month. He said it like he was doing me a favor. I asked one question, why now? They said they'd started to worry about me, that I was isolating myself, that it wasn't healthy, that my grandmother had influenced me too much, turning me against my own family. I told them the truth. I wasn't isolating. I was healing. And then my father's face changed like a mask slipped. He said, "If you're going to cut us off, Michelle will have to make some changes too." I didn't know what that meant at first. I thought maybe he was bluffing, trying to guilt trip me into backing down. I was wrong. That night, I got an email from my landlord. He wanted to schedule a discussion. Apparently, my father, who had co-signed my lease years ago when I was fresh out of school and barely getting by, had called the office, told them he was no longer comfortable being tied to my rental agreement due to unpredictable behavior and family tension. It was meant to be a threat. He thought it would rattle me, maybe force me to pick up the phone, but it backfired. The landlord looked through my payment history and laughed. He said I didn't need a co-signer anymore, that I had more than earned the right to stay on my own, that my father's name could come off the lease effective immediately. I sat in the kitchen that night holding my daughter, thinking about how far they were willing to go. Not just to avoid accountability, but to punish me for finally having boundaries. They hadn't come to make things right. They'd come to reestablish control. When my grandmother came by after her shift, I told her everything. She didn't look surprised. She just shook her head and said, "I knew they'd try something." That's not love, Michelle. That's fear of losing their lifeline. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't feel hurt or betrayed. I felt clean, like I had rinsed off years of obligation and guilt in one long, bitter downpour. And my daughter slept in my arms, her tiny breath steady against my skin. They could pull whatever strings they had left. But I wasn't theirs anymore. It had been quiet for a while. No texts, no doorstep drop-ins, not even passive-aggressive posts from my sister. I should have known better. Silence wasn't peace, it was strategy. I was up late with the baby one night when Evan showed up again. Not with coffee this time, with a duffel bag and a look that said, I've made up my mind." He stood in the doorway and said, "Mia and I talked. She's okay with me staying here for a while. He wants me to." I just stared at him. I couldn't figure out what surprised me more, that his wife was on board with this or that he cared enough to go this far. I reminded him that this wasn't just about late-night feedings, that this was messy and real and complicated. He nodded, said he wasn't here to fix everything, just to help me survive it. So he moved in, not into the bedroom, into the kitchen. Literally, we set up a fold-out mattress between the fridge and the wall. He never once crossed the line, never made it weird. He just became part of the rhythm. He cooked. He rocked the baby when I couldn't keep my eyes open. He fixed the leaky faucet without being asked. And every night when things finally quieted down, he checked in, not with big talks, just, "You good?" And most nights, for the first time in a long time, I was. My grandmother started coming more too. She'd bring a warm duffel bag of her own, filled with knitted blankets, soup, and old containers, and a crossword book she barely touched. He stayed weekends, sometimes longer. We didn't ask her to. He just knew. We never called it anything, but we were becoming a unit game. And for a while, I almost forgot about the outside world, about them, until they reminded me. It started with whispers. Neighbors saying my mom had been seen outside the building again. Then a woman I barely knew from church years ago messaged me online. "Your sister says you've been going through something. I hope you find your way back." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. But then one afternoon, someone buzzed the building's front door nonstop until a neighbor let them in. It was my parents and my brother. I opened the door just to crack. My daughter was sleeping in the bedroom. My grandmother was in the kitchen with Evan. They stood there like they were staging a scene. Smiles too big, arms full of bags, food envelopes, even a box of old baby clothes I'd handed down to my sister years ago. They said they missed me, said they wanted to come back together and heal. Then my mom handed me a manila folder, a spreadsheet. It was a list of every financial contribution I'd made over the past 10 years, labeled, dated, categorized. My dad said they'd been keeping track to show how much they valued me. My brother added, "We know we've leaned on you, but now we want to fix it." Then he handed me a tiny envelope. Inside was $60. They said it was a first payment toward everything I'd done for them. I stood there holding that envelope like it was a joke, because that's what it was. They didn't come to make things right. They came to buy their way back into my life on their terms. When I said no, my father's smile dropped. He said, "If you're going to cut us off, Michelle, don't expect us to keep pretending everything's fine." They left without another word. I thought that was the end of it. Until 3 days later, Child Protective Services knocked on my door. Anonymous report, unstable household, unclear custody arrangements, suspicious male presence. I knew exactly who it came from. The woman was polite but firm. She had paperwork, pack list. She asked to see the apartment, the baby, proof of medical care, income, and living arrangements. I was ready. I handed her everything. I showed her the pediatric records, the signed statement from Evan's wife, our custody agreement, letters from the NICU, utility bills, and a copy of my cleared lease with my father's name officially removed. She walked through the apartment. My daughter was napping in her crib. The place was clean, quiet, stable. 20 minutes later, she closed her folder and said, "We'll be closing the case immediately. I'm sorry for the stress. Someone clearly has a personal agenda." I thanked her, shut the door, sat on the couch, and then I shook. Not from fear, from rage. They were willing to drag my child into this to threaten the only thing I had left. But as I cut off their supply, as I said, no. That night, Evan tightened the screws on the hallway camera. I ordered another one for the stairwell. This wasn't about family anymore. This was about survival. And the irony, they still thought I was alone. What they didn't see was the fortress we'd built. Not perfect, not planned, but strong. Me, Evan, my grandmother, and this tiny little fighter of a baby. They'd used everything they had left. And still, I was standing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next because I finally knew what they could take from me and what they couldn't. By the end of the month, it stopped. No more visits, no more fake apologies, no more anonymous reports or guilt-laced messages. It wasn't that they gave up. It was that they finally understood something I had only just begun to realize myself. I was never going back. I wasn't their fixer anymore, not their fallback plan, not their item, not the glue they pretended held us together until it didn't serve them. My daughter started smiling around that time. real smiles. Not the gas or twitchy half grins from the NICU, but wide, gummy expressions that melted me on the spot. Evan was still sleeping in the kitchen, still waking up for feedings without being asked, still going back to his place once a week to spend time with his son and Mia, but he always came back. He kept his promises. There was no weirdness between us, nostalgia or tension, just quiet partnership. And Mia, I didn't know what to expect from her, but she was solid. She even came by once, dropped off a box of baby clothes her son had outgrown, and stayed just long enough to make it clear she wasn't threatened. She hugged me before she left. That hug broke something in me. Or maybe it repaired something. I don't know. My grandmother retired 2 weeks later. She didn't tell anyone, just quietly quit her job and started spending every afternoon at my place, holding the baby while I caught up on sleep or just stared out the window doing nothing. She said, "You gave your whole life to people who wouldn't give you a glass of water. It's someone else's turn to give now." After everything, I finally allowed myself to feel it. The loss, the freedom, the peace. My parents tried a few more subtle attempts. Birthday cards in the mailbox with $20 bills, emails pretending nothing had happened. I didn't answer. I didn't even open the cards. One day I got a message from my brother, just one sentence. "So, you really chose strangers over your own family?" I didn't reply, but in my mind I did. They weren't strangers. Not Evan, not Mia, not my grandmother, not this tiny little human I carried through hell. You don't get to claim family when you only show up for the benefits. You don't get to cry abandonment when the only thing you ever gave was a list of needs. Weeks passed, then months. No more surprises, no more ambushes. I took photos of my daughter every day, made prints, framed them. Evan hung them around the apartment without asking. Above the sink in the hallway by the crib, the space started to feel like home again, and I did something I hadn't done in years. I breathed without waiting for the next crisis. This wasn't a happy ending in the storybook sense. I didn't win the lottery, or find true love, or reconcile with my parents over coffee, but it was real. I had my child. I had safety. I had people who showed up. And I had peace. That was more than enough. It's been a year now, 1 full year since the NICU, since the hospital chairs, the beeping monitors, the missed calls, and the silence that said more than any words ever could. My daughter just turned 1. She's small but strong, all energy and curiosity. She likes to climb things she shouldn't, throws her food with Olympic precision, and somehow knows exactly where I've hidden my phone, no matter how clever I think I've been. Her laughter fills every corner of this apartment. She's alive, she's healthy, and she's mine. I still remember that tiny, fragile body under plastic and wires, and now I can barely keep up with her. Evan still comes by nearly every day, not out of guilt, not out of obligation, just because he wants to. Sometimes he stays late and sleeps in the living room. Sometimes he leaves early in the morning to take his son to daycare before work. He's not trying to be a hero. He's just consistent, present, and that's everything. Mia sends care packages every now and then, books for the baby, meals I can freeze. She doesn't insert herself, but she never makes me feel like I'm a burden either. He and I exchange updates now and then. It's simple, respectful, quietly kind. And my grandmother, she never left. She officially moved in last fall, brought her tea collection and her creaky recliner, and declared she was done living alone. She watches my daughter while I work, spoils her with attention, and acts like her bones don't ache even when they clearly do. She says it's worth it that all the years she spent watching me carry everyone else. It's her turn now. We formed something solid. Me, my daughter, Evan, Mia, even from afar, and my grandmother. A strange, stitched-together little tribe of people who don't use each other, just hold each other up. There's no drama, no manipulation, just the slow, quiet work of building something real. As for the others, my parents, my brother, my sister, nothing. Not even a birthday message. And that silence, it used to hurt. I used to wonder what was wrong with me, how I could be so easily forgotten after years of giving everything I had. Now I know better. They didn't disappear because they were hurt. They disappeared because they lost access, and without access, I was useless to them. They never reached out to meet my daughter, never asked to hold her or hear about her first word or the time she stood up on her own for 3 full seconds before toppling over like a drunk penguin. They didn't ask because they didn't care, and that used to tear me up inside. No, I've accepted it. The hardest part wasn't letting them go. It was realizing they were never really there to begin with. I'm not bitter. I'm just done. This past year taught me what love actually looks like. It's not dramatic. It's not transactional. It's quiet and firm and steady. It doesn't vanish when it's inconvenient. My daughter will grow up surrounded by that kind of love, not the kind that keeps receipts or disappears when she can't give anything back. Me, I'm finally okay. I still flinch sometimes when I hear a knock at the door. I still pause before opening unfamiliar emails. That kind of fear doesn't leave overnight. But I don't live in that fear anymore. I live in a home filled with tiny shoes, baby giggles, cold coffee, and real love. That's the ending. Or maybe it's just the beginning. Either way, it's ours.